Hey guys, I am the Comics Kid 2099 and I am here to do a video on
missed opportunities.
It's been a while since I've done one of these, so if you don't know what this is about, basically I talk about a story, either in comic books or novels or TV shows or movies, and I say, that story was okay, but it could have been better and here's how. Today, I want to talk about the Dark Angel Saga. This was a somewhat lengthy storyline in Uncanny X-Force written by Rick Remender. This story came out just a couple of years ago, somewhere in between 2011 and 2013, and the basic gist is Archangel is slowly becoming the next Apocalypse, and the whole idea is that Apocalypse had many different horsemen, many different deaths and famines and wars and all that kind of stuff, but every death is an heir to Apocalypse. So if Apocalypse is dead or is exiled into the center of space or whatever, then the next death who is in line is going to become the next Apocalypse. And so this is kind of building up on lots of subplots that have been building ever since the earliest days of X-Factor when Apocalypse first showed up, and around the 20th issue of X-Factor, give or take, when Apocalypse turned Angel into Archangel, or his Horseman of Death. And then the whole story is the X-Force team is trying to stop Angel from murdering everyone on the planet, while also trying to not murder him because deep down they all believe that he really is their friend. Now this story was actually pretty decent. I really didn't like the forays into the Age of Apocalypse world because I really don't think that Rick Remender has any understanding of the Age of Apocalypse. His vision of the Age of Apocalypse is entirely different than the actual Age of Apocalypse. But other than that, I thought that his story was pretty decent, like most of his Uncanny X-Force. It's not as fantabulous as everyone on the internet makes it out to be. It's okay. So you may be wondering, how would I have changed the story? Well, around this time, Gambit himself was going through some Apocalypse problems. In 2006, I believe, Gambit became one of Apocalypse's Horsemen of Death, and then after that, he went and worked for Mr. Sinister for a little while. Mr. Sinister seemingly undid the Apocalypse stuff, turned him back into normal Gambit, and then over the course of Mike Carey's run on X-Men Legacy, Gambit would, every once in a blue moon, turn back into his Horseman of Death appearance, and we really didn't have any idea why, but seemingly it was just that you can't really suppress that kind of thing, and he is going to pop back up when you least expect it, and especially when you don't want it to happen. Also, in the late 1990s, Wolverine was a Horseman of Apocalypse. You may have heard of the story where Magneto ripped all of the adamantium out of Wolverine's body around 94, something like that, and then a couple of years later, Wolverine joined Apocalypse, and then Apocalypse gave him the adamantium treatment back in exchange for his services as a Horseman. So, if you're keeping up with the score, there have been many X-Men characters who have been Horsemen of Apocalypse. The ones I mentioned, Archangel, Wolverine, and Gambit. Then you also had Polaris, who was his Horseman Pestilence. But Pestilence doesn't really factor into this video because she was not a Horseman of Death. So, the idea is that once Apocalypse is out of the picture, you're either going to have a resurrected Apocalypse, which happened in the first volume of Uncanny X-Force. It was never explained at all how Apocalypse's servants managed to resurrect Apocalypse as a little boy, but they did that. So then when the Uncanny X-Force team is able to put a stop to that, the next death in line is going to become the next Apocalypse. In this case, it was Warren Worthington III, aka Angel, aka Archangel, aka Death, aka Apocalypse Part 2, I guess. Basically, my change would have been, I would have had this be a full-on X-Men event. Instead of it just being Angel who is ascending to become the next Apocalypse, I would have had it be Wolverine and Gambit also, and have this sort of three-way Apocalypse henchman war kind of thing, where all of them are trying to become the next Apocalypse, and then you would have a whole bunch of X-Men characters kind of getting in the way, trying to keep collateral damage down, and also trying to undo all of this so that none of their friends become the next Apocalypse. If it had been up to me, this would have been a crossover between Uncanny X-Force, Wolverine's solo title, and X-Men Legacy, where Gambit was showing up at the time. Now, I have said before, specifically in my video If I Was Running the Asylum, where I talked about how I would make changes to all of the X-Men comic books, I've said before, I am not a fan of the big X-Men crossovers. The only one that I ever really liked was the Mutant Massacre, because it wasn't technically a crossover. Yes, it was a big story that spanned across 4 or 5 different titles, But you didn't have to read all of the Uncanny X-Men stuff to understand what was going on in, say, X-Factor, or Thor, or Power Pack, or New Mutants. And that's why I like that story. But I do think every once in a blue moon, a big, huge, line-wide crossover can be a good thing. It can drum up interest in the other titles, as long as you're not doing one or two every year. And that's really the problem that I have with all these X-Men crossovers. Since about House of M, give or take a year or two, it seems like we've had an X-Men crossover every single year, and it just gets tiring and exhausting when you have to read all of these comic books to get the complete story when you're not even interested in over half of these comic books in the first place. And that really is a problem with my own fix on this story, because this would not have been too long after Schism and Second Coming, and we would have had yet another big crossover between 3 X-Men titles, and it probably would have had ramifications in some of the other X-Men titles. But I cannot help but think just how awesome and epic would it have been, instead of one Horseman of Apocalypse ascending to become the next Apocalypse, what if all of the Horsemen of Death were ascending at the same time and they were having wars with each other, they were trying to massacre human beings because that is their duty as Horsemen, and they're also trying to stop the X-Men from stopping them. Unlike most of the crossovers that we've had since House of M, I actually think this story would have warranted being a line-wide crossover that spreads out across multiple titles, and it would have been a big enough story to deserve that sort of treatment, unlike, like I said, most of the stories we've had since House of M. But what's done is done, and the Dark Angel saga happened the way it happened, and it wasn't a bad story by any stretch of the imagination. I would have personally liked to have not seen any of the Age of Apocalypse stuff, because I really sincerely believe that Rick Remender has no understanding of the Age of Apocalypse, but other than that, it was not a bad story, and for all I know, if the way that I would have liked to have seen the story happen had indeed happened, we might have had a really awful X-Men crossover, who knows. So, that's all I have for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Let me know in the comments below. Also, I would encourage you guys to like or dislike if you disagree with everything that I've said in this video. Maybe you would like to dislike this video. I don't know. I would encourage you to do one or the other, like, dislike. I would like for you guys to share, comment, subscribe. Do all of the things that you love doing on YouTube videos. In the meantime, I will see you guys tomorrow with some other kind of video. So, until then, I'll catch you guys later. Have a great day.